It's great to be here at the CICC event and see a lot of familiar faces. And just before we even jump in on the panel, can folks raise their hand? How many entrepreneurs are in the room? Investors? Any other service providers, or just to have a sense? Okay, so we have a pretty broad mix of those categories. So IoT, the Internet of Things, and my name is Bruce Targain. I'm with Blumberg Capital, and I'll be moderating the panel. I really want to keep it informal, so if folks in the audience, and we have a small enough room and crowd that if folks have questions, just throw up your hand and we'll get you involved in the conversation. But why don't we start with our esteemed panel, and Alan, maybe why don't you start, introduce yourself first, and oh, sorry, I should have gone with Itamar since he had the mic, but Alan, go ahead, introduce yourself. It would be great maybe just to start out, if you could introduce yourself, kind of what your company is doing around the Internet of Things space, and kind of maybe what are some of the key things you're working on, key initiatives you're either working on right now or see yourself working on in the future?
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. So I'm Alan Proithus. I'm the president of North America for SIGFOX. And if you haven't heard of SIGFOX, it's because we're just really getting going here in the US. So we're actually a European-based company, and we're the world's largest provider of low-power, wide-area connectivity. And what that means is that when you talk about the Internet of Things, conventional cellular does a great job for what it does, but it tends to be a little expensive for the billions and billions of devices that are connected or trying to connect out there. Things that don't really require a whole lot of data, but you want the battery life to last a very long time. And that's the exact niche we're hitting. So we're announced and in the middle of deploying across 11 countries in Europe. We've been around 5 years, about over 150 million raised. And you'll hear a lot more big announcements next year from us.
Are you guys private or public?
We're a private company. We've some of our investors include Intel Capital, has been in for 3 rounds. Large telcos like Telefonica, NTT Docomo, SK Telecom, some large French industrial companies, and even Samsung has an investment in us.
Awesome, great, thank you. Itamar.
Hi everyone, my name is Tomer Cohen. I lead core consumer products at LinkedIn. I actually started the LinkedIn in the mobile group when it was a small port of traffic. It was around 8% when I joined, up until last year when it became 50% of traffic. And then I actually started doing core consumer, which is run across our search, newsfeed, homepage, discover and distribute products across the board. And Itamar asked me, "Oh, LinkedIn and IoT, that's interesting. Wasn't a clear correlation for me." So let me actually distill that a little bit. So when you think about LinkedIn, in many ways, it's really about from a data play in so many levels. There's the intelligence level, and then there's the infrastructure level. On the infrastructure side, for those familiar with what's powering IoT for many of those companies is Kafka, which was an open source code which was built by LinkedIn to actually being able to manage and service trillions of events per day and even more. And that's just by the fact of being a very strong data company. The other side is the intelligence behind what we do. So if you think about IoT, it's really about kind of electronics combined with interoperability together. There are sensors and they're working together, but that's kind of very fundamental there. Where I see IoT, my excitement comes from like the intelligence layer on top of it, where you can merge it with a person's identity, with their network, when you actually start to do some machine intelligence behind it. And that's an everyday challenge and excitement for us. So happy to talk more about that.
Tomer, maybe I'll get to Itamar as well, but maybe just a quick follow-up question. So what do you see as sort of the use case, like an obvious use case maybe for LinkedIn, leveraging this aspect of IoT?
Sure. So start with LinkedIn. You talk about the largest networks of professional identities. Then you talk about the largest networks of connections. And then you go to network of interest, and then you go to network of intents. So if you think about an IoT device across the board, it could be as simple as transmitting one to the other and basically managing that specific device he's trying to manage. Then you power it with the knowledge about the person. So let's take an autonomous, like something I've been talking about with Google a little bit around the autonomous car, where you drive into a meeting, but the car knows who you are. You have identity plugged into your car. It also knows your calendar. It knows who you're meeting. It knows the connections in common with who you're meeting. Then the car becomes not just a smart car. The whole devices behind you actually becomes the same thing. Connected to your device, connected to your identity. This is where you provide a level on top of everything else, a level on top of hardware and the software that powers it to provide a lot more intelligence. So you can start thinking about the combinations between hardware, software, and then intelligence And there's so many use cases across the board.
So it reminds me probably about 10 or 20 years ago, I think Scott McNeely from Sun, I think said, people are like, well, what do you think about the auto industry and cars? He said they're web browsers on wheels.
Yeah.
So I think now it's just, the IoT sort of technology, big data is taking that to a whole nother level.
Yeah, we can just call it internet, I think, at one point, and it's
Yeah.
that.
Thanks.
So the guy that got this guy into trouble, but he really did an amazing job to get out of it, because I think really IoT is a buzzword, but really it is all about everything being connected to the cloud and connected device talking to devices, right? And that's why it's interesting for every single company, including of course LinkedIn, who has a massive intelligence layer on top of people and relationships. So they've got to be looking at this as well as everybody else who's a player in internet and mobile. So Itamar, Novick, I'm the Chief Business Officer for Live 360. For those of you who don't know us, we tend to think of ourselves as the family network. It's all about location and communication within the core family, a little bit of extended family, caregivers. And what we do really well is always on location. So if you open our app, you'd see where everybody is. Is my kid still at school? Has my wife left work? Is she on her way home? When is she getting here? Those are kind of questions or the answers that we provide within the family. Pretty big app globally. We've got over 200 million downloads and tens of millions of monthly active users. So made a lot of progress. And now you would naturally ask, what does this have to do with IoT? Well, actually a lot, because I think what's different about this wave of IoT and automation is that actually a lot of stuff is really automated, right? Why did Nest win the thermostat wars, if you can call it that way? Because they came up with a product that's actually smart, that actually learns and uses data to automate. And that's where Live 360 fits in as well, because we have what's called the family graph, we've got the always on location, we have geofences. So with all that, we can actually empower any smart home, home security, smart device to just be smarter about all those things. One classic example is what we're doing with ADT, AT&T, and a bunch of others, including Google Nest, is once the entire family leaves the house, we know about it. We can automatically arm your alarm system, turn off the lights to save you electricity, dial down the thermostat to lower your gas bill, and a lot of other really cool stuff that we can do just because we know where everybody is and what they're up to. So that's really sort of our story.
So for all of you, just to throw it out there, is IoT sort of almost like a version 3.0 of big data? It's sort of, an enabler of big data and taking this analysis to the next level. What are kind of any of your thoughts in that regard? I mean, you're leveraging this, but yet it doesn't feel to me, and Itamar, maybe we can attack sort of the vertical that you're in within family and home. Have we seen the adoption yet? And yes or no? And if not, why? Like, what's going to change and what's been the impediment?
Sure, no, that's a great question. So, first of all, I personally hate the word IoT. I think it's a buzzword. So when I think about this, I think about different verticals of connected devices that are doing stuff that they couldn't have done before, right? They're connected to the cloud. They've got this intelligence. They can talk to each other, and that's what I'm really focused about. So when I think about what matters in the IoT world for me, it's really about home automation, home security, and wearable devices, right? That's where I see a lot of progress. Um, but the truth is, um, I think so far we have not seen the progress or the momentum that we would have loved to see on the consumer side, right? There was this big promise a couple of years ago that, oh, all those devices will be connected through a unified platform and it's going to magically, work. And it reminds me a little bit of, the internet in 2000, where everybody said, oh, look at all the amazing things that it could do. But it still took 5 to 8 years for all those things to really get, a mainstream, right? For all those users to be online, to be connected, to really realize the value that can be, created by the internet. I feel we're in a very similar spot with IoT, right? On the one hand, everybody's talking about it. It's big. Everybody understands that it will impact their business, right? This panel is about IoT and the tech giants. So the tech giants are thinking, what am I going to do with this? How do I ride this next trend? On the other hand, on the ground, there is not really as much progress as we would like, right? Um, where units are being shipped, where there's actually sales and there's traction, it's really more point solutions that do what they do very well, right? The Tiles of the world, August, Ring, those are the guys that are working out. Well, the platforms that really are the big promise of connecting all that stuff, that's sort of not moving as quickly as everybody wanted. So for me, when I think about the space, I'm very focused on home security. That's growing very quickly. And home automation, that's where you see, stuff beginning to work again, very much with point solutions.
Tomer, maybe jumping to a different angle, and Itamar, I think it's relevant for you, and Alan, I love your points as well. What about privacy? I mean, we're talking about security, but I mean, LinkedIn already seems to know everything about me. Similar with Life 360, all I need now is, I think, Itamar, you gave me an example of, I don't know, we're gonna have a teddy bear with a camera and someone's gonna hack into that camera and now they're, watching my kids, in the crib or something like that. So what are your thoughts? And I think there was actually a study put out by HP that said something like 70% of all IoT devices are actually not secure and have different abilities to be hacked and compromised. So, Tomer, LinkedIn seems to have, what do you say, a trillion events a day. So, I mean, what are your thoughts around security, privacy, and how we find that balance, or is privacy dead?
Yeah, so like putting aside my LinkedIn hat, I think privacy is potentially one of the biggest aspects of concern from IoT, and I agree. As a parent, thinking that everything is connected and somebody potentially has access, and a lot of the devices are actually very simple and easily manipulative, that puts a concern. But it also puts on a big opportunity for everybody to go and build an amazing solution at the same time. I think from a LinkedIn standpoint, that's something that we always take super to heart. So for us, like the privacy of the member, the data, it's always super protected. We actually never look at even physical profiles. If everything we do is broad, it's we're trying to get behavioral across the board. It's never actually, give an example, just from a company perspective, even when we showcase specific feedback from members, we actually never show the profile. Because that's for us is key, and we respect the privacy. But in general, when it comes across the industry, there's kind of a flip side to it. I'll give an example, which is, I think Google is probably one of the most amazing players because they have tremendous amount of data, search intent, but also those hardware devices that they can plug into. So when I would write on my browser the day before I want to go to Gilroy Gardens, which is a theme park for kids, and the next day I'll open my Maps app and I'll type in G, and the first thing that comes out is Gilroy Gardens. And for a second, you're like half scared, half excited. As a geek, you're excited. As as a parent, you're like, oh my God, this is kind of freaky. But I think that will be probably a huge opportunity for something to build something around it. So it kind of masks that information, but still allows you to get into that potential, because the potential of combining things together is exciting. A flip side of it, which is also pretty interesting, is when you combine companies' data together, or companies and how they work across different aspects. So think about Facebook working with Google. Probably will never happen, but think about that aspect of sharing information. Then it opens up a whole new era of opportunity. So I'm expecting regulation to probably come at some point, and some kind of platform restrictions. Or some kind of, in the same way you started across the board with everything you do today. But it's definitely a huge area of concern.
Anything you want to add either on that?
Well, I'd like to separate one or two concepts. So first of all, the consumer stuff tends to get the press because people can understand it. But just with a presentation with the top guy in McKinsey just 2 days ago on IoT, and the latest research says about 70% of IoT in the next few years is actually going to be more business, not consumer. I've seen numbers that takes that more to 80%. So when you get in the business side of the world, it tends to be a security question more than a privacy question. So I'm not trying to downplay the privacy concerns, but it comes down to really businesses can control that. And in some ways, it's good news for the industry, because for big companies, I mean, think about the mischief. It's like a bad episode of 24 when the nuclear power plants are set off by the terrorists. There's an incredible amount of mischiefs in factories. And if you talk to even guys like at Siemens, Bosch, there's a reason they're sort of moving at a bit slower pace, a much slower pace actually than consumer in some ways, because they have to make sure every step of the way is so locked down. So I think you need to separate the consumer privacy concerns from the enterprise concerns, and it's almost like an iceberg below the water. You're going to see sort of the enterprise stuff cook in the background, and you'll see more of the stuff with the consumer in the short term, and then all of a sudden you'll see all the enterprise stuff as it gets put together be much more visible.
So, Alan, on that note, then, so what's your sense of the time frame for some of the B2B side versus maybe the B2C? It sounds like you're suggesting that we'll see consumer adoption faster, earlier, sooner than we are, and that the enterprise side of it, the business to business, will just take a little bit longer because they have to make sure it's 100% bulletproof.
Actually, I'm saying just the opposite.
Okay.
Because with a business case, it's very clear. They have the money, they have a business case, and they have control of a solution pretty much end to end. In consumer, it's tough. It's some really sexy stuff you can do, and I really like the stuff you guys are doing. But the problem is you have these fighting ecosystems. Are you going to be in the Apple camp or the Samsung camp or the Belkin camp or your camp? And having these people talk to each other is very difficult, and you get right into the data ownership problems. Look what just happened in Europe a week ago with the safe harbor provisions being thrown out with data too. And believe it or not, that applies to us too. You get on a plane, I was just in Paris 2 weeks ago. This is a nightmare. People don't realize how bad this is going to be until this gets fixed. So actually, the business stuff is going to happen much faster. But people, I'll tell you the other secret. There is no such thing as IoT. No one picks up the phone and says, I've been reading Forbes. I'd like to buy 20 pounds of IoT and I'll take it in blue, please. Okay? They're buying a moisture sensor issue. They're solving an asset tracking problem. They're solving a very specific use case of which there are thousands upon thousands. But from the end customer mindset, they're never buying IoT. They are buying a specific solution to a very specific problem that we group in something called IoT.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Itamar, from your perspective, any sort of rebuttal, I guess, to that point in terms of maybe what's a middleware layer or something like that that can enable faster adoption on the consumer side, or are you seeing something different than maybe what Alan's sort of describing?
I actually think we're in a violent agreement on this. I'm not as bullish on
I'm
consumer
trying to get you guys to
technologies.
argue. I mean, it's
Well,
tension is
we
good.
can find something to argue on, but like,
I'm gonna have to turn to politics later.
no, we're actually in violent agreement. I think on the consumer side, as I've mentioned, things are moving more slowly than has been anticipated. I think there's a lot of opportunities on the business side, and that's where, even as an investor, that's where I would probably focus on, because that's where there's a lot of momentum that's happening now. I feel, and again, just basically totally agree with what you said. The world now is much more focused on point solutions. So a consumer that buys August because it's a smart lock where they can get their neighbors or their mailman to put the stuff in the mailbox inside the house, they don't care that this is IoT. They don't care about the cloud. They don't care about all that stuff. They want a solution that works. And I think what's happening on the consumer side that is potentially slowing down some of the innovation is happening less and less on the sort of business side, and that's really dealing with connectivity. So connectivity is an underlying problem, and you'll talk much more about that, I believe, is an underlying problem that really is stopping all those products from being super effective in their marketplace. Whether it's Bluetooth or Z-Wave or Zigware, all those different formats, all of them basically result for the consumer in a subpar user experience today that doesn't let a lot of those devices really accelerate in terms of adoption, right? And I think on the enterprise side, they've got ways to fix it, right? Whether it's a factory, they can install the right network, the right devices to really make stuff work and have the connectivity level that they want to see. In a business environment, that's an easier problem to fix. In a consumer environment, you're dealing with all this foray of different devices, smartphones, different technologies, and it's hard to get something that works really, really well out of the mesh of all those things to get astronomical adoption on. So that's I think the difference between the two.
Okay. Tomer, maybe on your side, I mean, I'm curious, and you touched on it a little bit maybe in your intro remarks, but I'm curious, the social network of the future, for LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all these folks, how are they, what does that look like for us, leveraging machine learning, IoT, down the road and some of the use cases around it? I mean, we talked offline a little bit about like personal assistant, you touched briefly on that, but maybe if you can expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think for LinkedIn it's interesting because we are like a B2C to B player, and there's a strong business aspect, there's a strong consumer aspect to give a sense of a vision for the future. So you can think about the economic graph that LinkedIn is basically working to build. On one hand, you have professionals, so you want to represent every professional on earth, and currently we have 380 million knowledge professionals on LinkedIn. The TAM is around 620 knowledge professionals, but then you have 3 billion skilled professionals. So basically, you want to represent almost everybody on earth. Then you have institutions like universities they can have their own representation digitally. Then you have companies, and then you have something more ephemeral like jobs or skills or knowledge and so on. But like you can see how that graph plays together in terms of data. Where if I come to a company and it's a smart enterprise or the building is connected, and Elena is there, and I can connect to Elena easily and see where we are and what is she doing there and so on. I can also see what we have in common, what's the source what's the deal I'm trying to source. This is a little bit, I think, when it comes to, I agree that you'll see maybe more traction around the business side, but it doesn't mean it's bigger. I think the consumer side tends to be a little bit more nuanced, but then when you hit it, it tends to be pretty amazing in how it grows. How many of you guys have Alexa at home? Great. How is it? It's cool. So currently we are in the cool phase of Alexa. For those of you who are not familiar, it's Amazon's kind of personal assistant, and it's actually pretty cool. Like I wouldn't buy it because I need to, but if you have an extra $150, it's actually pretty cool. So I think this is where we are a little bit on the consumer side. So nothing is.
What are you using it for, if at all, or are you gonna is it a regift?
Yeah, which is where you start to see the basic behavior. It starts with simple stuff. Now, again, just to play data again, when you bring intelligence into it, then you're actually able to not only crunch, but also crunch real time what's happening around you. Then I'm excited about where it could take you. So it's not surprising for me we're starting slow. I don't know if we're continuing slow, but we're starting slow. We're starting basic because the basic use cases need to be done. We need to move from cool to like you really need this as home. Phones used to be cool. Now you don't leave the house without your phone. You don't leave the sofa without your phone. So it's maybe 5-10 years from now. It could be next year, depending on how much growth we'll see into it. But that's at least my perspective.
I'm curious from your side. Do you see the whole IoT initiatives with some of the enterprises? Is it more about revenue generation and creation, or is it more about cost savings, or is it both?
It tends to start with cost savings because it's easy to justify those kind of business cases. But what's rapidly happening as people get into this is they're realizing that the data is enabling entirely new business models. I mean, whether you view it as the servicification of everything, but that's what's happening really quickly. And what you're going to see happen, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see this small group of real thought leaders that have, just like in any new technology, that have adopted more quickly with some of these new business models. And then you're going to see this incredible rush for everybody else to catch up because they're literally going to get wiped out if they don't. And we're seeing this in just about every industry that there is because you have access to data for the first time you couldn't imagine. And so it changes the information you have about every decision. It doesn't matter if you're in the elevator maintenance business. I mean, they realize now they can predict. It's the same thing with these all power generation windmills. If you can collect the data and you have the right algorithms, you can actually predict with 90+% certainty a 30-day window of when something's going to fail. And so what you're doing then, you're changing your entire business model to a services business model from a product model, and you're actually making a lot more money on less revenue that's more predictable. And so the amount of new business models being enabled in really boring industries like insurance for even, tying in data they could never even dream of accessing before. We know company simple things like even just being able to very accurately track your driving patterns and driving style and where you're going and mileage. And really, it's like what Uber's doing on a whole different level for all different kinds of applications. So we're seeing some really incredible things out there. And you're going to see these pop to the surface again over the next year or two, and then you're going to see this rush for everybody else to catch up before they're wiped out.
Who are some of the folks that you're seeing as kind of thought leaders and giants in the space and ahead of the curve, for now, to the extent you're seeing?
There are a lot of people dabbling. A lot of people know they have to play with it, but they don't really know what to do with it. I'd say, one of the most consistent leaders has probably been GE. And because they haven't incorporated in one particular business unit, they've incorporated it as a horizontal approach across every business unit. And they've been an innovative leader in really integrating new business models into every operation for a long time. You don't see that in the press as much because it's so B2B. But for instance, airline engines as a service. They have so many tens of thousands of data points inside of one jet engine. They can predict exactly, based on conditions and time of usage, exactly what they need to do with that engine throughout its entire lifespan. So anymore, you're not buying engines, you're buying the service a jet engine provides for your plane.
They couldn't help my flight from being delayed yesterday.
Well, they're not doing planes yet, just the engines.
Got it. Got it. Tomer, maybe on your side from LinkedIn and from the social perspective, is it more cost savings? Is it revenue generation? What's kind of the main impetus for some of these initiatives?
I think for us, it's added value and differentiation. I think at one point you'd expect the layers to be commoditized to an extent. Once you have a strong protocol, people talk with each other, and it's something you hook up to a machine and you run from there. So for us, it's really focused on the data differentiation and the intelligence behind it. Then we don't necessarily think in cost saving; we think in value. It could be very different for a consumer company. Again, we're kind of the odd company out a little bit in that sense. But for us, it's really around those angles. When I think about tech giants in the industry, I'm actually excited about Google. I think both a hardware company, a software company. Last Google I/O, there was the push towards the protocols and protocol on the device, protocol for interoperability, Nest. You can see those coming to life, and again, just to play the amount of data they play into as a differentiating factor and not as a commodity, that's exciting. We bring a part of your life into the table, so we will never be the complete story. We will always be a complementary story, which is going to be very, very strong. It's going to be unique, but it's not going to be the kind of play side of your life. It's going to be the work side of your life, and that's something we have chosen by design.
If anyone in the audience wants to throw up their hand with questions, I'm happy to take those and we'll incorporate those in. Otherwise, we'll keep chatting amongst ourselves, and hopefully you're gleaning some good information. I mean, I am curious, and I would actually open this up maybe to everyone in the room. We're talking about IoT, and we're sitting here at this California Israel Chamber of Commerce event. I wonder for our panelists and for anyone in the room, in terms of the Israel relevancy and connection, are any of your, I mean, we talked a little bit about this offline, but any specific, not to use a pun, any specific connectivity to Israel that you're seeing within any of your organizations or some of the companies that you're working with as relates to the whole IoT initiatives?
Yeah, I wouldn't go through a lot. I like the profile of the Israeli technologist or entrepreneur because I think they come from a strong technology play. And I started my career in semiconductors, actually built chips at the beginning of my career. So I like the profile of the classic Israeli engineer. And I think that should actually be a strong competitive advantage. Companies in the space which are interesting, again, this is not endorsements or just companies I got to know and I thought they were actually pretty cool, there was a company called New Era who is actually working across trying to combine devices together. So understanding protocols are going to be very, very different. Everybody's going to try to do their own thing. And how do you make devices work with each other? So I thought that was a pretty kind of a more forward-looking aspect of trying to solve that problem. There's ones which are not classic IoT. I think you talk about Waze or Move It, and you can see them being great in IoT, but I don't think they'll call themselves IoT companies. I think they're trying to solve a very specific problem. They're going to leverage IoT, and they're going to be part of that graph to actually solve it. Those are just top-of-mind examples.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree that the sort of classic, skill sets and know-hows that Israelis have are very, very relevant for today. I mean, sort of, hardware being at the forefront. Israelis have a long tradition, have been very successful on the hardware side. And I think we touched on it a little bit when we talk about security. I think security, there's a huge opportunity there because every time, the world moves from web, let's say, the mobile, there is a shift in how security is being done. And we're going to see that story happen again in IoT, right? And it's going to be bigger, faster. more significant, and it's also a very big deal. I just had this conversation with my wife last week, and there was this article about all sorts of weird, probably not so good people tapping into baby monitors and then talking back to the babies through IP online. They found a way to hack into that, and my wife was like, "Oh my God, is this happening now in our house?" And like, no, 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 take it easy. Um, so I think we haven't even started seeing on the consumer side and on the enterprise side the implications of dealing with this massive amounts of data with actually devices that connect to our physical lives, right? Because IoT bridges between the two, physical and digital entity. And that has much more profound meanings when it comes to security and when it comes to privacy, both of those things, than anything we've seen before. And Israel is positioned, is poised to be a significant player in that market. So I'm really looking forward, and also talking to a lot of Israeli companies about how they can be successful in that space.
We're going to, like I said, we've announced and rapidly building out in 11 countries across Europe. We have not made an announcement at Israel, but I would actually approach it from a little different angle. True, there's a great hardware background, but I think culturally, Israelis tend to be pretty scrappy in figuring out answers to very specific problems. And I think the people that are going to win in whatever we call IoT are going to be people who can think outside the box a bit on entirely new business models. And so I think culturally, I think it's very well suited for that.
I'm sure. Question in the back.
Sure. Some of my best friends are mobile carriers. So it's if you I've spent a couple of decades working with them around the world with an emphasis on North America and Europe. And so mobile carriers, for as much as people like to carrier bash, let's face it, none of us would be carrying around these things in our pocket if they didn't do a good job connecting us and being able to stream, stupid videos, cat videos, as wherever you are. But today's network around the world, they've done such a great job, but they're optimized for, I don't know if I think of that big data or big connectivity is one way to think about it. So they're excellent at that. But if you think about a classic product approach, like a good, better, best, they're actually over-serving. And if you like Clayton Christensen, it's a great way to think of it too. They're actually over-serving a majority of the potential audience in what we're going to call IoT, in that there are billions and billions of orphan devices, whether it's, again, a smoke detector, a security system, a water meter, that they're never going to need that kind of bandwidth. In fact, they need 1% of that bandwidth. So there's a great unaddressed market that can never justify, from a business model standpoint, to go ahead and buy a $30 or $40 LTE module and go ahead and pay for what that service costs a year. So really, SIGFOX is completely complementary to existing conventional cellular carriers in that we aim to be the absolute low-cost provider in the entire network. So for literally $1 or $2 a year at scale, we can connect those devices. And the trade-off is you're never going to get big connectivity. You're getting little bits of data. You're getting a battery that can last as long as 10 years in a lot of use cases. And you're getting a seamless experience around the world. So it's really we're going for the very lowest of the low niche of the market, which happens to be billions of things. They're going and doing a great job on more things that require high data without consideration of battery life.
I'm curious, actually, from the audience, if there's anyone that's running an IoT-related business right now, either as a startup or more established. Just share with us kind of what you're doing.
Sure. I'm with Wind River. We make probably best known for making real-time operating systems. That's our legacy. But for the past few years, we've been a pretty prominent player in IoT. So we have both an IoT gateway as well as a backend system that helps you manage devices remotely. And I fully agree with what Alan said as far as what are the business drivers. I think we're seeing it's a two-phase approach. It typically starts with a cost reduction or asset optimization play, because that is very easy to make an ROI case for. But then once you get the devices connected and you have the data available, it opens up very interesting business models, and I'm happy to share some innovative ideas if you're interested.
Okay, that's interesting. Question for the panel, I guess, is there seems to be kind of maybe 5 verticals that are recognized within IoT as, core auto, industrial, cities, consumer-related businesses. What do you see as maybe another new vertical that might crop up and you surprise everyone and become more prominent, I guess, with the IoT ecosystem?
Yeah, I think if you go towards the verticals, the way I look at it from small to big. So you have the wearables, you have the homes, you have the cities, you have the environments, and then I don't know if it's once you cover that, you're pretty much covered. Go global, and then it's all connected. You have cities being built in South Korea, all based on IoT. They're all connected across the board. I don't know if it's a vertical play as much as a horizontal play across them. So it's the connection between all of those together and how they play out. The connection between the city to the home. It's not necessary that if you build a city network that you actually have kind of a manifestation of how the home is built. It can go all the way from security systems to controlling the what Live 360 is doing itself. But for me, it wasn't specifically around the verticals as much as around how those all connected together.
That's a pretty tough question. So it's hard for me to think about what we could imagine in the future that we can do with this. Clearly, there is a lot, which makes me more focused on where the momentum is, right? What is really growing fast? And I think what we're seeing in Live 360 is how we're seeing a massive acceleration with tying location into everything that's actually, portable that could move around, right? Mobility is becoming key to IoT, whether it's wearable devices. We're starting to see a lot of, kids watches that help, see where your kid is, where your dog is, those kind of things, which have been around for a while, but honestly, they just haven't been working very well, right? They weren't ready for consumers. So I think that's changing rapidly. And tying location into other assets in our lives. We're talking a lot about cars. There's clearly a lot happening there with cars, driverless cars, all that. That's big, but I think there's a lot of other use cases that are increasingly being covered in IoT, and I think that's where we'll see a lot of momentum in the next year or two.
So the great thing about verticals is every analyst has a different definition so you can sell the report. And it ranges from 5 to infinity. And again, I think
I
it's
saw the one with 5.
okay. It's going to be, and sometimes they add colors, and it really looks official then. But I think you're going to see thousands. You're going to see some general high-level ones. But like, for instance, remember at the beginning of this year, there's actually a pet wearable company that got 15 million in funding, and I not only could track where your dog is, but is it sleeping enough? Is it exercising enough? It's basically Fitbit for Fluffy, and it's a great example of not a place I'd put my money, but it's a great example of the experimentation you're going to see in this market. From a platform perspective, it seems like every analyst is doing a platform report right now in IoT. And at last count, I think there's over 200, and frankly, I think it's double that. So I think, again, what you're going to see is because of the complexity of putting a solution together in so many pieces up and down the stack from hardware connectivity and then all the different data pieces, it's about 5 or 10 pieces for a basic solution. What you're going to see now is you're going to start seeing vertical integration. We started to see some of this, what PTC is doing with their ThingWorx and Exceeda and some other pieces they've picked up. You've seen this in Fleet for a number of years because it was an early segment. And so what you're going to see now, little by little, I believe, is you're going to see people pushing for horizontal because it makes sense long term. But in the meantime, you're going to see these verticalized, specialized solutions that over time will try to expand into adjacencies.
Itamar, I'm reminded from your comment about sort of mobile being the driver and creating this ubiquity across all of IoT. We as an early stage venture fund, we used to actually break down different sectors, and mobile was one of the sectors that we would invest in. We would talk about enterprise and cyber, digital, and mobile, and then we actually stopped. We stopped because it just became it was clear that it was just mobile first across the whole portfolio, that every one of our companies was attacking mobile, and it wasn't really its own sort of niche sector. So maybe that's almost reminds me of your comment that maybe that's what you're touching on in terms of IoT and the evolution, and maybe that's one of the enablers in this proliferation is really our smartphone devices and some of the big data that's being generated sort of historically.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to think about it. It's just the cyclical nature of technology in general, right? We're really, at the end of the day, for technology companies that want to keep growing very quickly, and so you have to jump into the next trend in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should be IoT first. I think that's different than the mobile world. So it really depends. I think mobile enable the internet to be extended into everybody's pocket, and that's huge. I think IoT is more of a game changer in the sense that here are all those new things that we can do now with IoT that we could have never done before. So it's more about discovery of new services, new capabilities, whether it's moving from, a product-based economy to more of a service-oriented economy, which is very interesting. You see all those new models coming up, hardware as a service, right? Uh, Making sure you don't have water leakage as a service, right? That's interesting. All those new things that weren't there before um, that are happening. So I think a lot of new business models are going to be rewritten using IoT, and that's what gets me excited.
Tomer, I'm curious, maybe if you to take a lead at it, we touch base off this a little bit on email, but what do you think some of the ethical maybe dimensions or concerns or moral issues that might arise to the extent we're seeing human machine interaction and it's, this is so futuristic?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a topic, similar to privacy. Privacy touches part of it when you kind of want to go. You're gonna go very deep. I'm guessing all of you guys have been hearing this kind of Elon Musk open public debate with Google about the AI aspects of it. So when you come about machine and intelligence, and you have device-to-device communication, you have device to human. Device to device is somewhat scary, and potentially like you actually want to build this kind of master algorithm that will control them all. You're very excited about it because the potential is huge. You also want to have a personal assistant that has connectivity to everything, so you can actually simplify your life. We're not there, but you can. If you're an AI geek a little bit, you can actually see how you get there, and that opens a like ethical issues across the board from being able to make decisions on your behalf. Even play the live 360 for a second. When I'm gonna like play with your temperature at home, maybe I'll change some stuff, and I'm gonna make decisions based on what I predictively what I've seen you done before. I'm gonna start doing it for you, but there's gonna be a point where I'm gonna start to make decisions that you haven't made before because I think I know you really well. And that's not far. That's not science fiction. That's actually that's very much imminent. And I think the problem is not with the algorithms today. They're there, but I don't think the technology there is there yet. So I think once you start playing that angle, there's so many questions that happens across the board. For me, it's really about decision making. The moment that a machine starts to make a decision on my behalf, which happens by the way all the time, but a decision that I used to make repeatedly, and I have to make it. The classic one is the car one, where I don't know if you guys are familiar with the kind of the train diversion dilemma, where the car has to make a decision whether to hit a kid or to hit a family or whatever, but there's no other way. Where humans used to make those decisions, and then you're kind of leaving it all to the algorithm. And again, as an AI geek in that sense, I, you know, partly very excited, partly very kind of scared, very concerned about where that could take us. And being IoT connected all over the place, that just means you just have the ability to control everything you do. I even thought about the question with mobile, and I don't know if it might be a strong statement. I'll make it anyway. I don't know if you need mobile, because if your watch is connected, and your desk will be connected, and wherever you go will be connected. Mobile was basically a solution for you to be connected because you were kind of going in an offline world, and you couldn't kind of carry your laptop, and it was too big. But if everything is connected, maybe mobile becomes a little bit more and more obsolete. So in that sense, that plays out across the board is very interesting for me.
Anything, Alan or Itamar, that you want to add to that point that you're seeing?
One of the things that concerns me as a guy who spent a lifetime in technology is just, I don't know, every week, how many different things come out about our personal data being leaked out, to the point where there's pretty much no integrity in the system. And to me, it's more frustrating when you even know how the stuff works. And so all these things are not, they're inanimate objects. They're not good and they're not evil. It's really what people do with them that makes them so. And, and I think you're going to see what I'm concerned about is when you get outside of the bubble of Silicon Valley, and I used to have an office in Cupertino, so I've been here, but when you get outside of the bubble of Silicon Valley, there's a very different perception, especially among educated people, even that embrace technology. But I think the level of nonstop issues coming up, it's not that anyone's expecting Terminators to rise up or anything like that, but it's just the lack of confidence in this stuff on a couple different levels, both in the companies behind them and the people behind them, I think is actually going to start retarding growth of technology at some point here. I just wonder about that sometimes.
Itamar, anything on any ethical issues that you're running across, or issues that you see down the road?
Well, I don't know about ethical issues as much. I can tell you one insight that we had. I think for a lot of us, the psychology is around control, right? So if you feel that you're in control over the machine or all those connected devices, as a person, you feel you're in a good spot. When that control is taken away from you, then you really start freaking out. So I think that's more like the psychology piece of it. So I think companies will have to find a smart way to do automation, which is smarter than what they've been doing before, right? So one example that we recently had, we know again how to arm automatically an alarm system when when the entire family leaves the house, but are you, do people feel comfortable with that? Well, what about disarming when you're coming back? Maybe you haven't really come in. People have a little bit of discomfort around that because it ties into security. So it's really about finding a smart way to interact between the people and the devices that still keeps people in control. And I think that's an important sort of thing to think about as we build and develop those systems.
Sure, I'm sorry, question?
Yeah, yeah. It just brings up an interesting subtopic, I guess. I'm sorry, self-driving cars. Do people really want self-driving cars? And I guess it's does it take away your freedom? Does it take away your control? Or how's it done well? Will people want it? It is an IoT play in a way, not exactly. But I just curious on the comments. I'm not sure how I feel.
I think he said no, so I want to see what he has to say.
I want a self-driving PC that does my email. This is a little bit outside of my area. I think it's going to be a cultural thing. If you look at the concept of privacy with millennials or teenagers, if you have them, versus
There is none. I mean, they're such voyeuristic. It's a different.
every generation has a very different perception. So I think you almost have to use that kind of stratification when you try to answer that kind of question. And I think while I enjoy driving, and frankly, especially all the flying I do, I actually find it relaxing to drive. Um, there's a lot of stuff we do today on the anniversary of, we're Back to the Future Day, right? This is the day Marty McFly went into the future, and we sort of have some of those things, less fax machines, but we do have something called the hoverboard that doesn't quite hover, but it's getting close. So I really think it's based on when you were born, and it changes your expectation set for all these things.
I think we're probably down to like a minute or less. Any other, unless there was a further comment from Tomer or Itamar, any other questions from the audience? No? Go ahead.
What happens to all the data? Because there's so much of it and it never disappears. So when does that become like a landfill problem or something?
It's going to be digital landfill.
I think China's holding that all for us, so it's okay.
Well, I think it's when you look at the storage capabilities at the same time, they're growing really rapidly. So I do think it's interesting because sometimes we haven't encountered a storage issue per se, because you find
Not from a storage standpoint, but
like
just having it.
a corpus of your data.
Everything that's ever happened is out there. I know we can store it, but what are the
Well,
problems?
I mean, it's actually created a lot of new technologies to store that information, just so it's not so simple. Because it went from people storing a Word document to people storing a picture to a video, and now you're touching on all this data from machine to machine communications. It's become an enormous problem in terms of storage, archive, intelligent storage. So it's not so simple, and it's created a whole new investment infrastructure around that, frankly. So again, I think you're going to see lots of opportunities that come off of that, and there are going to probably be new companies like, probably every decade you have a Facebook, a Google, an Uber, et cetera. We're going to see some others that are going to crop up, in my opinion, and hopefully we as early stage investors try to identify and invest in them early.
Yeah, just one quick comment is with SARBOX, you actually have to have a defined policy on data retention, among other things, for corporations. Now, the policy, though, can be forever or it can be 5 minutes. So it doesn't actually tell them how much or how little they have to keep, but it just says you have to have a policy. So for corporate data, at least.
All right, so I think we're out of time, but thank you guys for our panel, and thank you